of both of you. So come on, baby, come on over. Let me be the one to show you. I'm the one who wants to. DBQ. Deep inside, I hope you feel it too. Feel it too. Waited on a line of waited on a line just to be the next to DBQ.
Welcome back, young scholars. I hope you guys are feeling as excited and passionate about DBQ as I am. So this is the second video on DBQ. In the first video, we talked about how critical it is to read that prompt carefully, break it down, and then to start reading and annotating the documents. Now in this video, we're going to talk about the third step in the process, which is identifying documents that are similar, that have similar characteristics, and then starting to group those documents together so you can build and establish some claims. As you are reviewing the documents, one of the things you should have in the back of your mind are there any documents that strike you as similar, that could potentially support a claim that was responsive to the prompt. You want to try, if you can, to create at least 3 groups. 2 if you have to. 2 is perfectly acceptable. You can still earn a whole bunch of points by just having 2 groups. But ideally, if you can put together 3 different groups or categories of documents, the way I like to do this is just on my piece of paper to create a small little grid. And as I'm going through, I'm putting the documents into groups. This is not connected to any particular DBQ. Then the most important thing is I have to identify those claims, the characteristic that's shared by the documents that I could use as a basis for an argument. I generate my claims, claim A, claim B, claim C, connected to each of the documents in that particular group. For our DBQ, the prompt is evaluate the extent to which the discovery of silver by the Spanish in the Americas brought about changes in the economic exchange and production in the period 1550 to 1700. We talked about how critical that word changes was because it let us know that we need to focus on that skill of CCOT, or continuities and changes over time. Because the prompts ask you to evaluate the extent to which, it's going to obviously be critical for you to identify some changes. We know that you can also, and should also if you can, write about things that are continuing or staying the same. So when you do write a claim that involves change, oftentimes there's some good action words. I like to think about changes being things like an increase in something, or a decrease in something, or the development of something, or the growth of something, or the spread of something, or the transformation of something. So having some of those change action words ready to go at your disposal as you start to generate claims, really good skill to develop. If you're trying to make a more complex, nuanced argument and say, well, the discovery of silver definitely brought about some changes, but there were some things that stayed pretty constant. One of the action words to use when we're trying to identify continuities is this one, the persistence of. So you can say, in spite of these changes, there was the persistence of this particular characteristic, whatever it is. So now I encourage you to take about 3 minutes to try and put the documents together into groups, and then to start to generate some of those historically defensible claims. The next step after you've generated those claims is to start to put them together and synthesize them together into a thesis. You ideally, again, have 3 groups. Hopefully some of the groups represent claims about changes. And then ideally, again, if you have a group about continuities or things that are persisting. So you're going to write the thesis statement by connecting these groups or claims together. The thesis must consist of 1 or more sentences located in the introduction or in a specified conclusion. The thesis should be found at the very end of your introductory paragraph or in a conclusion. And I encourage you to use connection and transition words like while, however, although, if it's a comparative essay, both, or by contrast. If you're writing a CCOT essay, there is a template that you can use when you're writing a thesis. It could go something kind of like this. You have to take some of the words from the initial prompt and spin them around. So between 1550 and 1700, the discovery of silver in the Americas led to changes in economic exchange and production, such as that is our claim A, or change A, and now we've identified our change B. However, a continuity throughout this period was the persistence of blah, whatever it was. So now it's your turn. Pause the video. You should open a Google Doc and take the claims that you wrote and start to put them together into a central thesis. Again, there is a template that you can and should use to help you along with this process. The next thing I want to do is take a look at some sample thesis, and these are actual theses that have been scored by the College Board, and so that can give us some sense of what might or might not count as a point towards thesis. So here's our first example. Shortly after the discovery of the Americas, the Spanish stumbled upon a huge silver mine in Potosi, making them eligible to finally trade for Chinese commodities. Between 1550 and 1800, the contributing factors of the extraction of silver and the pursuit of Chinese luxuries have led to changes in the global silver trade. So the question is, does this count? So if we apply our rubric, does this constitute a historically defensible claim that responds to all parts of the question? And take a second to decide for yourself. The answer the College Board gave was yes. This does count as a historically defensible thesis because you have a contributing factor which involves the extraction of silver. Again, not super specific and detailed, but that does have something to do with economic production. And then the pursuit of Chinese luxury goods, so that demand for East Asian goods did lead to changes. You can defend that particular point. And so College Board says, yes, this, even though there's only really two major claims there, the extraction of silver and the pursuit of Chinese luxury goods, that was sufficient to count as a point. Would this move you in the direction of scoring the advanced understanding unicorn point? Probably not. I mean, this does not account for a lot of complexity. So I don't think you're probably in line based upon your thesis to score that advanced understanding point. Now look at example 2. Between 1550 and 1800, the European powers are trying to trade with China and looking for valuables and shorter routes to get to China to trade for Chinese goods. Between 1550 and 1800, two patterns emerge in the silver trade. Silver leaves European hands to not come out, and silver never comes back to Europe. All right, is this going to count as a thesis point? College Board looked at this one and said, is this a historically defensible claim that responds to all parts of the question? The answer is no, probably not. And if you sort of are wondering, well, what this part at the end gets a little bit muddled and lost here, if you actually read the last document, you can sort of see that last thing that this student was focused on was reading document 7, and you can see some of this language about silver never leaving Europe and never coming back. But there's not anything sufficient there to stake a historically defensible claim. While it's true silver does leave European hands, the next part, to not come out, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Really, it's talking about coming out of where, and silver never comes back to Europe. Some silver actually does flow to Europe. So it's not really this historically defensible claim that the student is making here. Third example, the patterns of global silver trade from 1550 to 1800 was caused not only by the conquests of Europeans, but also by the notoriety of China in global exchange as well. Here's a good example of where the student wanted to write an essay using a different historical thinking skill, and that's causation, when they should have been talking more about things that were changing as a result of the discovery of silver. The College Board said this does not count as a thesis point. They start to address maybe a historically defensible argument about how the silver trade leads to increased conquest by Europeans, but the notoriety of China in the global exchange, China was already a major player in global exchange. They don't need much more notoriety, and certainly the silver trade in and of itself didn't play that role. What about this one? When the Spanish discovered silver in Potosi, Bolivia, the Chinese wanted to get the silver for their currency. The Europeans, mainly Spain, wanted China's goods, such as silk and spices, so the Spanish and the Chinese traded their silver and goods. Everyone benefited. From 1550 to 1800, some patterns led to the patterns of the global silver trade. The need for silver and goods led to the patterns of the global silver trade. So does this count as a point? Does this make a historically defensible claim that responds to all parts of the question? The College Board said, yes, it actually does. And this is a great example of you have to filter sometimes through some of the crap to find the gold. Here, where is the gold located? Well, it's potentially located in the beginning of the response. The Chinese wanted to get silver for their currency. That is a historically defensible claim. That works. And then the Europeans, mainly the Spanish, wanted China's goods, that there was demand on the Europeans' part for Chinese goods. That also is a potential change and or continuity when it comes to the silver trade. Is this going to move you in the direction of getting that unicorn point for having complex understanding? Probably not, especially the stuff towards the end. If you have too much of that, then you're definitely not going to score that 7th point for complex understanding. In your introductory paragraph, in addition to your thesis, you also need to include contextualization. So you want to start your introductory paragraph with contextualization. But in my mind, you might want to think about writing your thesis first. And so a little trick, I encourage you to start your thesis about halfway down your page if you're handwriting your essay. That gives you the opportunity then to go back and write your contextualization at the top of the page. Now notice, I do not indent when I write my thesis. I do indent when I write my contextualization. And then if there's any gap between your contextualization and your thesis, you should just draw some arrows to show that those two sections are connected. Then I would start my next body paragraph by skipping a few lines and then indenting. So what is contextualization? If I showed you this painting of this woman on this bottle of organic tomato sauce, and I asked you to draw any conclusions about her facial expression, you probably wouldn't have very much to say. If I showed you her facial expression in the context of the actual painting from which it was taken, you certainly might have a lot more to say, and that's why context is important. So contextualization situates the argument within the broader historical events, developments, or processes of a particular time period. It must include specific supporting details. One way that we can think about contextualization is using that Star Wars crawl. So before the Star Wars movie, the contextualization comes up and it provides you with 4 to 5 sentences that articulates the events or actions that occur that allow you to make better sense of the movie that you're about to watch. Contextualization should be at least 3 quality sentences. When you're thinking about writing contextualization, you really need to go back and think critically about the prompt. In this particular prompt, it's asking you about the extent to which the discovery of silver by the Spanish in the Americas brought about changes in economic exchange and production in the period 1550 to 1700. So for me, the important details related to contextualization here is the discovery of silver by the Spanish in the period 1550. You have to provide some explanation or context for the reader that helps them understand how the Spanish discover silver in the Americas. So what is the most recent and relevant information in the prior century? In this case, from 1450 to 1550, the reader needs to know in order to understand the essay. Another way to ask it is, what are the most immediate events that leads to the discovery of silver and the impact that it has worldwide? And as you're reading the documents, you also should keep contextualization in mind. In this particular case, you have a document coming out of China in 1610. And so in addition to thinking about contextualization as it relates to, in this case, the discovery of silver, you might need to provide some contextualization about what's happening also in China that may have contributed to their role in this silver trade. If you ever get stuck on any essay, whether it's LEQ or DBQ, one of the things I encourage you to do is go back to those inspect themes. And so you ask yourself, all right, what's the economic context behind the global silver trade? What's the political context, social context, interaction with the environment, technological context, cultural context? Now, some of these themes are going to be more relevant than others, so you start to lay out that contextualization and help the reader get up to speed. For instance, in this case, I would argue economic context and political context and maybe technological context are certainly going to be more important than maybe cultural, social, and interaction with the environment because of the nature of the question, which is asking about the global silver trade. So now it's your turn to write some contextualization. Before your thesis and the introductory paragraph, write at least 3 quality sentences of contextualization. In the next video, we'll be talking about the body paragraphs and specifically how to include evidence in the form of documents, how to source a few of those documents, and how to incorporate outside evidence into your body paragraphs. As always, thanks for watching.